Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm Sean O'Laughlin.
I'm Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy.
And today we're sitting down with the co-founder and chief commercial officer of a company called Moleaer. His name is Warren Russell, and he's going to be talking about a new innovative technology called Nanobubbles. But before we get into that, we got to go through everything. Please make sure that you subscribe to Aquademia wherever you're listening right now to make sure that you get all the new episodes automatically downloaded to your device as soon as they come out.
Make sure to follow us on social at Aquademia Pod. If you want to reach out to us, do so by email, podcast@aquaculturealliance.org, or you can fill out a contact form on the education page located at aquaculturealliance.org.
And drumroll, please make sure that you have rated and review us on whichever podcast platform that you listen to us on.
That's right. That's how we get up the charts and how we get more listeners in the community and how we can just grow this big group of people that are really trying to push the agenda of responsible and sustainable seafood. So let's get right into the conversation with Warren. I hope you guys enjoy it, and we will talk to you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
All right, so we are sitting down with Warren Russell, who is the co-founder and chief commercial officer of Moleaer. How's it going, Warren? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is one of our seafood innovation episodes where we're going to talk about a new technology. Although, how new is this technology? How long has this been around, Warren?
It depends who you ask. So for us, we're going into our fourth year of commercial operations. But Nanobubbles itself have been around for probably a couple decades.
Okay.
Most of the innovation sort of was led out of Asia, specifically more Japan. But yeah, it's been around for a while. They first observed decades before that, sort of an indirect observation from actually like torpedo production, not torpedo production, but specifically as a byproduct of torpedo is being launched. And it's been commercialized in different capacities for different applications in different sort of sequences over time. In the US, it's fairly new. I say North America and Europe, it's newer probably in the last 5 years. You see it. And then we see even in the last 2 years, a lot more momentum as there's more and more market awareness around it. So it's definitely becoming more common.
Great. So not a brand new technology, but something that is fairly new to the aquaculture industry, specifically, like you said, over here in the western part of the world. Yeah. So we are going to be talking about nanobubble technology, and I could give a little kind of short description of what that is, but I definitely wouldn't do it justice. Description? And I could, and I would probably get a lot of it wrong. So before we get into what nanobubble technology is and what it's used for and how it can be used in seafood, Warren, give us a little quick background on you, who you are, who are we talking to today? You know, how did you get involved in this, and how did you get to where you are?
Great question. So it's interesting. My personal background was dealing a lot in sort of the environmental sciences side, working in soil remediation and agriculture, and that sort of dovetailed into industrial and wastewater applications. Sort of as it related to sort of the introduction to Moleaer, it's sort of this synergistic relationship with oxygen and these various different kinds of gases in these processes, and how we came to look at nanobubbles was really, could we make the efficiency of transferring gas into these various liquids more efficient or essentially more economically feasible, and that's sort of led to the journey of looking at various different processes and how we could apply those on an industrial and scalable manner to use them in different applications. And obviously, as it relates to aquaculture, the use of oxygen is paramount to maintaining or providing optimal husbandry or growing conditions for fish. But it also has these secondary sort of benefits, and that's probably one of the most interesting parts about nanobubbles is how there's these additional benefits that go beyond just the gas that we're putting into solution, and it's the unique properties of the bubbles themselves, which lend to enhance various processes along the way, and that could include certain solids or liquid separations within an hatchery to improve the quality of water. It could be looking at removing certain off flavor compounds from those waters, and then even more nascent but equally interesting is how we're sort of exploring using these nanobubbles to remediate offshore net pen systems where we're injecting the nanobubbles at depth and remediating the seabed. So there's a variety of these sort of applications that we've tailored around our equipment, to address. And the exciting part is just sort of that commonality between all these markets and industries of how these gases and nanobubbles can be used for these different processes. And obviously, most importantly, adding a lot of value to those processes.
Cool. So I want to talk about the technology itself. How can this technology be used outside of, because I'm sure we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about how it can be used in aquaculture, but what are some other applications that this has been used for? I saw a video on YouTube where you guys were setting up a system at a indoor or greenhouse agricultural site. So agriculture obviously is one application of this technology, but how else can they be used?
Yeah, so agriculture is a big market focus for us, and just sort of it falls under the umbrella of treating irrigation water in general. And again, sort of it's either to support a biological process. So in this case, you've got a sort of microbiome in the soil, which oxygen is promoting various different processes within that. And also, first and foremost, is just the respiration for the plant. So oxygen is an integral part of that process. And when we were looking at agriculture as a whole, we just saw that a lack of oxygen is an impediment to an optimized system. And it was sort of an underserviced segment of treatment that we thought we could do very, very well at improving. And we've done that. And as a consequence, you just look at really addressing some foundation elements of either improving root health or soil health and all the derivative benefits from that in terms of growing a healthy plant just sort of stem from treating that foundation more effectively. But prior to that, again, it was we started with applying the technology in industrial water treatment, and generally that relates to supporting a biological process. So, when you have, your wastewater, either from your home or industry, that goes through a collection system that ultimately arrives at a treatment plant, and that most of those treatment plants operate off a biological process. So you've got microbes that have generate an activated sludge, and oxygen is a huge part of that, or aeration in general. And what we saw in the early stages is that, again, sort of the amount of energy required to treat that water is significant. And if you look at the various sort of aging infrastructure and sort of the way the communities have grown or expanded, it puts a lot of stress on the infrastructure, particularly these sort of older treatment plants. And we just saw an opportunity, if there was a way to really enhance and optimize a treatment process within a given footprint. And that actually has a direct correlation to how we look at aquaculture as well. It's just, within a given infrastructure, can we enhance the growing conditions? I mean, that may mean just improving water quality, or it may mean improving the amount of oxygen available to the fish. But conceptually, we're thinking about it the same way. can we use these resources more efficiently and optimize the output in some way?
So, Justin, Maddie, do you guys have anything before I don't want to take over the whole episode here?
No, ask away. I'm sure at some point some of the notes that I have will fit into the conversation.
Okay. So I'm curious about how it works. We talked about, increasing the efficiency of oxygenating the water. Mm-hmm. I understand, the dissolved oxygen levels in different areas of the water column, more shallow versus deeper areas, is going to be different. And, the nanobubbles are going to be helpful in making a more even DO distribution. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
I'm curious how these are made. How are you able to produce such tiny bubbles? I mean, these like thousands of times smaller than what you would think of with bubbles, right? I mean,
yeah.
These are itty bitty. How are you actually able to produce this? What's the technology behind the physical production of these nanobubbles?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question. So there's several different methods of producing nanobubbles, and we use a sort of a hydrodynamic diffusion process, and we selected that again. Sort of my co-founder and chief technology officer Bruce Shelton, sort of based on our backgrounds when we were looking at essentially coming from an industrial water background, looking at sort of what could be practically implemented in these environments where there are a variety of different water qualities, and most importantly, how could we scale it up to work in a water treatment plant, and so that when we were looking at various different ways of doing this, those were sort of the key drivers for us. Like, could this work in harsher conditions? Obviously, energy efficiency is paramount, and then also second to that is, could we scale it up? So if you see a lot of systems out there kind of look small and probably more adept for a laboratory than in a greenhouse or out in the middle of severe ocean conditions and trying to work sort of at an efficient and consistent manner through the life cycle of that equipment. So those were the key drivers, and so for us, not having moving parts, being able to scale linearly was important, and we've been able to do that, and that's given us sort of a few distinct advantages in so much as the adaptability of the equipment into all kinds of different processes or configurations gives us a lot of flexibility. So it's generally easy to deploy and integrate, and so for us, that adoption curve has given us a little bit of leverage in entering new markets.
And where would you say a lot of that market is? And again, I know that this technology is used in a lot of different industries, but are you seeing this in specific regions, mostly in the United States? I mean, it sounded like a couple of decades ago when this technology kind of started in Asia and Japan. Where are you seeing a lot of this technology kind of sprouting and growing the most?
For us, I think we look at it just sort of where our market focus is and where are the core applications that are of interest to us, that sort of check the boxes in terms of market share and how applicable we feel our equipment is to service that market, and also where our infrastructure is. That's a big important one for us. So I think the market is global, and there's no shortage of opportunity anywhere. To be perfectly honest, I mean the amount of applications that this can be applied to is an extremely long list. So we're very selective about where we can do this, implement it successfully with the right infrastructure to support it. And so for us right now, that's in the Americas. South America is growing very, very consistently, and I wouldn't say aggressively, but very healthily. And then Western Europe as well, and then Canada, US, and Mexico is a dominant market for us.
Okay, so let's get into aquaculture, because this is the world that we live in. Primarily, we're looking at RAS systems, recirculating aquaculture systems. And I've worked with some RAS systems, and I've toured tons and tons of RAS facilities. And I know there's a couple different ways to approach the dissolved oxygen. I don't want to say issue, but the dissolved oxygen parameter in your water quality, right? And a lot of these larger facilities, these larger RAS facilities, are going to have something like a J tube, right, that goes down underground and allows that water, the oxygen, to kind of like off gas as it goes in a different. It's like natural, using natural pressure to do that, right? So that's one. I know when I worked at my last job, which is a zebrafish facility with all RAS, and the way we oxygenated our water was we had giant air stones in the sump pumps, in the sump tanks. So, and then we were able to use probes to monitor that and everything. But we didn't really have much control over the oxygen level in there because we were just pumping these giant air stones. So how is this going to be useful to RAS? If these people have they're working in RAS systems that are already set up, and they got either a J tube or they got something else that they already use to address this, what are the benefits of implementing this as opposed to something like that has already been proven to work for what they're using it for? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, it's sort of looking at. So, I mean, in our experience, I mean, we see sort of it changes by the region, and it certainly who the designer build from for a RAS facility, they have certain preferences to the technologies that they use. I think traditionally we see a lot of oxygen cones as a common method, and if it's not an oxygen cone, pack columns as well, or a combination of a low head oxygenator with a cone or a pack column. And then, diffusers as well. That's sort of like the ubiquitous backup method of aeration or oxygenation. So it's a good juncture, sort of, where I find people, our prerequisite to getting into this sort of commercial endeavor was actually really diving deep into the fundamentals of aeration. We worked with a gentleman out of UCLA by the name of Michael Stenstrom, who is probably one of the foremost aeration experts, certainly North America, perhaps even globally. And sort of going through that process and independent testing and to standardize testing is really understand, the strengths and weaknesses of all these different alternatives. So if you're looking at a diffuser, right, a diffuser will transfer on average between 1 and in a very, very ideal, optimal situation, about 3% per foot of water. Now, if you take that into context of a RAS facility or an aquaculture hatchery, for example, most of those tanks are pretty shallow. If you take, 2.5 meters. So your transfer efficiency is very much limited by the confined depth of these aeration tanks. So diffusers are cheap and easy to deploy. There's definitely some maintenance there. But if you actually look at sort of the oxygen transfer efficiency within that given footprint, you'll see that it falls pretty short of what would be optimal. When you add other constituents into the water, like emulsion from feed and other TSS and other things, which actually impact something called the alpha factor, that can diminish that transfer efficiency by another 40%. And so now you're looking at a transfer efficiency that's maybe 1.5% per foot of water, and you can quickly realize that there's a lot of room for improvement in that. And it's the same thing that we encounter with cones as well, or pack columns, is you have a technology that in an ideal situation is and can be very efficient. The reality is, in most cases, when we see these equipment in the field, they're not operated in ideal conditions, and perhaps the biomass inside of a tank is a little bit higher than they originally anticipated or designed for. And so they're operating that cone with a slightly higher gas flow rate, or the oxygen concentrator that's feeding that cone is sort of has some sort of variability in the pressures that it's producing, and consequently provides a different or random specification of gas that's coming to the cone. And that variability makes it very difficult to run those pieces of equipment efficiently. And so when we've gone essentially deployed our technology in these environments, whether it be competing against cones or pack columns or cones, generally we've been able to do remarkably better than those. And a lot of it just has to do with sort of the operating conditions that those equipment are being operated at, and then sort of the ease and flexibility by which our system can adapt to different gas flows, different pressures, and still not have a compromised performance. And then certainly specifically to oxygen transfer efficiency, with our process, a large part of that oxygen is transferred through the mechanism itself. And by the time that water is then discharged into that tank, the bulk of that oxygen has already been transferred into both the dissolved oxygen form and as well as the nanobubble that's in there. So we're not constrained by depth in the same way that the diffuser is. And that gives us a pretty significant advantage in some of these environments.
And I imagine that would help with not just the fish health and welfare in regards to maintaining a consistent dissolved oxygen level, but also if they're running a biofilter, which if you have an RAS system, you should be running a biofilter as well. Yeah. And that oxygen is going to promote the really robust growth of those bacteria in the biofilter as well, I imagine. For
sure. And it actually goes a little bit beyond that, which is some of the interesting sort of secondary benefits that I was describing earlier. There's essentially we've done work with some labs that do DNA analysis on certain ammonia oxidizing bacteria and looking at the kinetic yields of essentially bacteria supported through diffused aeration versus nanobubble aeration. And we've seen up to like a 20% improvement in ammonia oxidizing bacteria, as well as higher kinetic yields from that. So the idea is that the nanobubbles are actually able to penetrate a little bit deeper into that fixed, whether it be fixed film or flock formation, and provide a little bit more of a healthier biomass, which then can consequently improve your ammonia removal rate. And then it goes a little bit beyond that as well, as sort of looking at how, and this actually dovetails into some of our wastewater applications, and looking at how this negatively charged particle, which is the nanobubble that's floating through a system, and how that charge is able to sort of bond with other suspended particles in solution, and able to either separate that or at least bring that out of solution and through captured more efficiently through a filtration process. And those are distinct properties and benefits to the bubble itself beyond just the oxygen that we're obviously supplying through as a vector from the bubble.
Can your stocking density increase if the dissolved oxygen within the water in the containers for say an RES system, could you have a bigger stocking density?
You could for sure, but
conditions are right.
Sort of put a caveat to that is just stocking density would be proportionate to like maintaining healthy water parameters, right? So as long as you're not compromising your water quality in any way, that may allow you to increase stocking density. Likewise, dissolved oxygen, it's well understood, being close to your 100% saturation gives you a better feed conversion ratio, and certainly as there's an abundance or an adequate level of oxygen, your fish are not going to be as stressed as much. So I would caution in answering that by saying nanobubbles are some magic solution that's suddenly going to allow you to increase stocking density. But certainly in relation to supporting a better water quality, a better dissolved and more uniform oxygen level throughout a system, the opportunity to increase that biomass is definitely there. Yeah.
Yeah, because the stocking density is dependent on a lot of other things as well. The size of the tank, the water flow, and all that.
Right.
So there's a lot of different factors that can go into that. But I can really see how you can drastically reduce stress on the animals in some scenarios, depending on what their system is set up like, which is ultimately going to result in a better product, a more high quality product at the end after slaughter. So,
Definitely.
Yeah. Cool.
So it seems like there are significant efficiencies with nanobubbles. So how can farmers actually implement this technology? And going along with that, is it only relevant for RAS?
No, it's actually across the board.
Nanobubbles, or can you use it in other
that's one of
aquaculture
the
systems as well?
Advantages and certainly sort of, I would say, like the ideal part about the solution that we offer is that it can be applied in so many different areas of that value chain. And so looking at hatcheries, it could be flow through, it could be RAS. Some customers, they may have, let's just say it's a federal hatchery in North America, and they're close to a decent well source, and they have good quality water that comes in from there. Even still, we have a lot of situations where they may have a high dissolved nitrogen in that water, and they need to gas it. We've applied this technology to do specifically that as a replacement for degassing systems. And then traditional aeration oxygenation systems where that's applied, whether it's looking a farmer looking for just an improved operational efficiency, so lowering OPEX, whether energy or oxygen costs, replacing things like some of these conventional treatments. We apply in all of those capacities, and even so, it doesn't depend on necessarily the fish. I wouldn't I can't say that word. I wouldn't sort of focus on sort of lower margin crops per se, things like tilapia on the basis that sort of it's a lower margin crop. However, sort of the irony is that some of those crops where they do suffer from off flavor compounds that do have impact on the quality of the crop that they produce would serve to benefit quite significantly from a technology like ours. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Not always necessarily the capital budget to look at new technology like nanobubble technology, but certainly the value and benefits are there to be had. And then certainly offshore, which is a sort of a big market segment for us, is it could be everything from algae prevention, supplementary aeration for net pens. Right now we focus on salmon, but certainly that could entail everything from just an emergency aeration, consistent supplemental aeration to increase oxygen levels through certain depressed times of year when oxygen is not that great. Certainly in Canada right now, looking at semi-enclosed systems, which obviously is very topical right now, is just from the environmental risk perspective and trying to make sure fish don't escape, and sort of how can you do it more safely. And certainly, I think obviously one of the drivers for the semi-enclosed system is also sea lice prevention. But it's a give and take, because once you introduce those tarps and if it goes down 15 meters, you're compromising the flow of water through that system, and consequently now you become more of almost like a RAS facility, where now it is heavily reliant on mixing and oxygenation or supplemental oxygenation to support the biomass that's in there. And then also one of the sort of more new novel applications that I actually love, because it's really so easy to implement, and yet surprisingly it's not as widely adopted in the industry is just you're sort of under this governance of environmental stewardship and remediating the seabed below these licensees. And I think we've demonstrated now on numerous occasions that it's actually relatively easy and cost effective to provide remediation to seabed and make sure that environment is well maintained, and you're not leaving sort of a negative footprint from these operations. Which I just, for me, I'm in the school of thought like the aquaculture is a necessity, the requirement for more environmentally friendly protein production and being able to, but being able to do that efficiently, not only with the source of oxygen, but also sort of an environmental way, and having these sort of tools at your disposal to do things proactively, that obviously has a great benefit to the long term sort of sustainability of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's what we're all about, is responsible, sustainable, produced seafood. So if a farmer wanted to implement this technology into their system, what steps would they need to take to do that?
For us, it's really simple. I mean, the equipment is akin to installing a pump. We just do some very, very simple sizing metrics. We look at it could be what the oxygen shortfall is. It could be a simple calculation, what the biomass is and the amount of oxygen that we required. We have different size systems, and we just do a very simple estimation of what we think is necessary. And then, in some cases, we've had situations where the customer has a cone on site. They already have pumps there. We just use the pumps from the cone, divert the flow from going to the cone and divert it through our system, and then put that back into, it could be going into a central header line, or it could be going directly back into a hatchery tank. It just varies depending on the configuration. If it's a saltwater operation and it's net penetration, we have either package solutions or sort of individual ones depending on how they want to go. But again, just conceptually think about, okay, like I'm going to bringing water from a particular target location, from a location, and bringing it into our system, our technology. Our nanobubble generator is converting that bulk gas, which could be coming from an oxygen concentrator or liquid oxygen, converting that and then discharging that back into your desired location, which could be, as I said, it could be everything from the seabed all the way to the net pen, or if it's in a hatchery, it could be anywhere within the hatchery process.
Cool. Pretty simple.
So you mentioned before that even though it seems so efficient and generally cost effective, it hasn't really caught on in the mainstream yet, at least not here in the US and the Western half of the world. So why do you think that is? Why hasn't it fully caught on yet here?
Yeah, it's so I think it is catching on. To give you a thing, we've literally only just started focusing on aquaculture in the last year, and specifically in North America, Canada, in the last 6 or 7 months. And I think it speaks to what my earlier comment is just, people in the industry itself, they want to understand like the collective knowledge of what this is, how to use it, how to optimize it within our process, and what are the implications of adopting it. So I think that's one thing that we recognize and sort of try and prioritize within Moleaer is sort of becoming those domain experts. We're not just an equipment supplier, but we really have to fundamentally understand, first and foremost, aeration fundamentals, and then the role of oxygen, these various different processes, and then most importantly, how we integrate these into a net pen or a hatchery, and bringing that knowledge is critical to helping people understand how to adopt it. So it's definitely in its early stages. I think some of the sort of our predecessors or other parts, I think have perhaps had challenges pulling all those pieces together to provide a comprehensive solution to the market. Because I definitely think that, us just, whether you're a foreign company trying to sell to a Canadian operation or a Chilean operation, unless you can provide a turnkey solution for them, I think it's very difficult to get them over the hump.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So what are some potential challenges or disadvantages to this? Is there anything that farmers anyone who's using this technology should kind of look out for or be wary of? Because, I don't want, like you said, we don't want to tout that this is a miracle cure for anything oxygen.
Yeah, no.
What are some of the challenges that people may face using this technology?
I think the most common question we get is like associated with gas bubble disease. I think people hear nanobubble and they think
they get nervous about that.
Yeah. Microbubbles, and then generally using sort of not a pure form of oxygen, and consequently like this concern over gas bubble disease or gill health. Typically, that's I think our most commonly encountered question or concern as it relates to our technology. And to date, we've observed no contraindications, no implications to fish health. Obviously, on the contrary, we're looking at a healthier, less stressed fish as a result. But I think sort of addressing these sort of erroneous concerns at the forefront is probably the biggest obstacle. Is again, it's hard for people to conceptualize. We use the term bubble, but it's at such a minuscule scale that really it's more like a colloidal particle than it is a bubble. And the risks associated with gas bubble disease are just not there. That's certainly a risk. And then sort of coming back to, I think I don't think this is unique to nanobubbles. I just think in general, anybody that's adopting new technology, coming back to my point, like even with our technology, even with a cone or anything, you can do things wrong. Whether it be a pack column, you could oversaturate the water, you could be, not balancing your hydraulics correctly, and certainly that can have implications, and we're not immune to that. You got to know how to apply it. You got to know within what are the optimal ranges of operation, and I think that's part of that whole education that I feel like is an integral step in educating people adopting this, how to use it and where to implement it.
Great. Well, we're getting a little short on time, so I want to kind of talk about what's going on, what plans are for the future with Moleaer, and what we can look forward to seeing from you all in the next coming years. But Justin and Maddie, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about before we did that?
No, I think just to piggyback off that question, Sean, really is, what does the future hold? How has the technology advanced over the last 20 years, and where do you see it in the next 20 years? And I mean, I know we talked about how it's currently being integrated, but how is Moleaer look in the future to you? Yeah, what's on the horizon?
I could tell you Mars. We're doing some work with NASA looking at microgravity cultivation, which by just coincidence, having something that's submerged in water and some of the impacts of hypoxia because of the lack of oxygen is directly relevant to what we do, because we can saturate that water and mitigate that hypoxic conditions. So it's an interesting catchphrase, but yeah, I mean, we're really keeping a very open mind to the trajectory of where we want to be. I think the education that we've had to date is sort of allowing us to really provide, I would say, a collective knowledge of implementation that goes beyond just providing a piece of equipment. I think it lends itself more to a solution and process enhancement. So we would look to hopefully be able to really dial in a RAS facility, for example, where, within the next year or two, we can provide the right oversight to understand, like, okay, well, applying the technology here is where we best mitigate H2S formation or off flavor compounds, and hopefully with all of those optimizations, we can provide a much more comprehensive offering to the market. And it's the same thing, with sea lice treatment being so topical for offshore salmon farming, and how do we address that? I mean, it's a huge, from an environmental standpoint, the use of chemicals and pesticides or hydrolysis or whatever. Like, how could we do that more sustainably and more efficiently? And whether that means using a semi-enclosed system, and how do we optimize that process? I think if I'm looking forward, I'm hopeful that within the next few years, we're providing that solution to the industry as a soup to nuts. From environmental monitoring and how to automate the integration of all the equipment to mitigate things like algae, or at least provide some sort of immediate response to a threat like that, whether it be oxygenation or preventative treatment. And then looking at how, we tie the role of oxygen to when the fish are sort of actively feeding, and sort of really optimizing those relationships between it. I think that's hopefully where I think we are in a couple of years.
Yeah, the industry is definitely there's no shortage of innovation. From the short time that I've been in this aquaculture space, I have seen tremendous improvements in technology. The industry is demanding it. People are constantly looking for ways to be more sustainable, to look for better production rates, and this really fits in perfectly. So I think your vision and where you want to be, I really see that truly happening for you, and this technology fitting in very nicely within the aquaculture space.
Right. Well, the other thing about that, Justin, is that this industry is very receptive of new technologies, which is not the case in a lot of industries, especially in industries that provide food. But aquaculture specifically is very, very receptive to new technologies and innovative technologies. So yeah, I'm excited to see. I'm sure we'll see an increase in demand and usage of this technology, and then that will probably lead to further innovation within the field. So I'm really excited to kind of see what's on the horizon for the future as well. But I don't want to keep you for too long, and I don't want this episode to go too long either. So Warren, is there anything else that you want to get out there before we wrap things up?
No, just stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's an exciting journey for us, and we're thrilled to be part of it. As I said, I think aquaculture is such an important industry as a whole to provide sustainable protein for the global demand, and the opportunity to enhance it, to make it more sustainable just checks all of our boxes. Obviously, commercially, we have sort of financial incentives to be part of it and to get our equipment out there, but the fact that we can have a more meaningful impact and to affect the industry in a way that I think has long-term benefits is probably the most exciting part for us.
Well said.
Definitely.
Warren, if any of our listeners are interested in this technology, what is the best way for them to reach out to you? And again, any contact information that you're willing to share with us, we can put in our show notes. But what is really the best way that someone could reach out to you or the company?
Through the website, for sure. There's a form submittal that you can go through that will then get diverted to the various appropriate people depending on the region or wherever it is. But yeah, that for sure is a very simple, easy way to get in touch with us.
Perfect.
Great.
And we'll put that website right on in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. Warren, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We haven't done a Seafood Innovations episode in a really long time, so I'm really glad that we can start, getting back talking, getting a little nerdy and talking about some science more, because we haven't been in there as much. Again, it's Warren Russell. the co-founder and chief commercial officer for Moleaer. Thank you, Warren. We'll stay in touch. We're excited to see what's coming.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time, Warren. Great to meet you.
Cheers for now.
Folks, that was our conversation with Warren Russell, the co-founder and chief commercial officer of Moleaer, talking about nanobubbles. As always, hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I learned a lot. My head's spinning a little bit.
Me too. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's something that I truly had never even heard of.
It's super cool. And that's why I love doing these seafood innovations episodes, because I always come out of them like, oh my God, that is so cool.
Yeah.
And I hope that some of our listeners here are thinking about this technology and seeing if there's a way that they can implement it into their systems, because I really do think that there's a lot of benefits to this, and I think it's going to be making some big differences in the quality of the seafood that's farmed in the future. So pretty cool.
It's going to be making bubbles in the industry.
Pretty cool.
Sure.
Yeah, making
good
bubbles.
One.
Kinda. Not really, but kinda. I'm glad he kind of clarified what they actually are, even though they're called nanobubbles.
Yes. I asked Maddie if I could pop a nano bubble with a nano pin before we started, and she said, "Don't ask that."
Yeah. I'm glad we didn't pull that out. But all right. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to Aquademia wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you get all the new episodes downloaded directly to your device as soon as they come out.
You can reach out to us via email, podcast@aquaculturealliance.org. Fill out our contact form on the education page located on aquaculturealliance.org website, or follow us on social @AquademiaPod.
And make sure that you've rated and reviewed us on whichever platform you listen to us on. And don't forget to check out the show notes, because there's a lot of great information down there.
Yeah, Maddie writes the show notes, so you know they're good.
Yeah, shout out to me for writing all the show notes.
They're chock full of good resources down there, so make sure you don't pass that up. All right, thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Ciao.
Bye.